Stephen Courtright. I'm a professor of management, Susan Flippin Endowed Chair, and the director of the Flippin Leadership Institute at Mays Business School. We use burnout really loosely. Sometimes we can use it at the end of a week and say, I'm feeling really burned out. But there's a big difference between stress and burnout. How can you notice when burnout is actually happening? What are the symptoms? And in that regard, the research would show three things. One is that there's a feeling of emotional exhaustion. This is very similar to a feeling of physical exhaustion. We've had this when we've either been, working outside in the heat, maybe in our, in our yards or gardens, or if we've been working out for a long time, or otherwise had a physically strenuous type of activity. That sometimes we just feel like all we can do is just sit in our chair and we just can't move. And emotional exhaustion is kind of the same way. If you have the feeling that it makes me sick to think about going into work, so I stay in my car for a little bit longer, or I just wonder in my head, I cannot take another day of this. That's what's called emotional exhaustion. And that's the first and primary symptom of burnout. But beyond that, two other symptoms that come with burnout is number one is we start depersonalizing those that we serve. And so if we start feeling like that we used to care but no longer care about those that we're serving in our work, that might be customers or clients or even our coworkers or our organization, when we start having this sort of sense of cynicism and depersonalization, that's another symptom of burnout. And then a final one is this loss of professional efficacy, or I just feel like I no longer feel like a successful professional, or if I put in the effort and hard work and creativity, that I can be a successful professional. Those are the three telltale symptoms that burnout is happening. Stress is different. Stress can make us work harder. Stress can give us energy, and we might feel really tired at the end of a week, but if we're ready to re-engage the following week, then we can know that it's more stress that we're feeling than we are burnout. Burnout makes it so that it's increasingly harder to feel like that we can give of ourselves and our mind, our hearts, our efforts to doing the work. It feels like that you just can't go on anymore. So those are just some really key differences between stress and burnout. I hear a lot of people say, I'm feeling really burned out, when actually they're feeling stressed. And the reason why that's important is that the way that you solve burnout is totally different from the way that you solve stress. So I can solve stress by a good workout. I can solve it by things like, habits, daily routines. I can solve it by a vacation or a couple of days off, or even by a weekend off. Those are things that can be used to fix stress, and the list goes on and on. Meditation, religious rituals, good music, time with family, all those things help us manage stress. Those things are like Band-Aids on a flesh wound when it comes to burnout. When it comes to burnout, the degree and the severity of it, the longevity of it, are just much greater, that a vacation is not going to fix that, or time off is not going to fix that. To fix burnout, you have to fundamentally change the way you do work, and the organization and the leaders have to fundamentally change the way that they do work in order to stop burnout or to address it when it's happening. In previous generations, it was harder to get a hold of you once you left work. You had to call the landline at home. You weren't on 24/7 email access, or now even more so smartphone access. And so the more and more the technology is advanced, the more and more the traditional lines between work and home have blurred. So always being on really means that you're psychologically not detached from the work. And we've had these experiences before, everyone has. You go home from work physically, but in your mind you're thinking about the next big project, or you get a message from a teammate or from a boss at 7 o'clock at night, or you have to respond to emails that night just to get ready for the next morning. All of that makes it so that the boundaries essentially blur. And whereas before they were just a little bit less permeable, if you will. So always being on is really largely a result of increased technology, which has both made our lives easier and made our lives harder. A leader may feel, and I have coached and trained in thousands of managers at this point, and I myself am a manager, and I've certainly done this and faced this before. We may feel we're doing them a favor by always being available, say on vacations or at nights for questions, and we may say that's a signal that we're really committed. But what can actually be a signal of is that it's not appropriate to shut yourself off from work and detach yourself from work. And the research is very clear that detachment from work psychologically makes us much more productive the next day. We need to shut our brains off from work. Our workplace deserves that. Our employees deserve that. Leaders set the signals by how they manage their own boundaries. If they don't manage the boundaries, then other employees pick up the signal that it's not appropriate for them to do it either. When we leave a physical domain to go to another domain, to enact sort of another role, there's a role transition that takes place, and that role transition means everything. If we can transition ourselves out from one role to the other, then we're likely to be better in both roles, and we're likely to feel that we have been managing those boundaries more effectively. One thing that really helps with that is some kind of a ritual that you go through. The research is really clear on this, and that might be a ritual during the commute. For example, you might play certain music, or you might listen to a non-work related podcast. You might call a friend or a family member. Some kind of a daily habit or ritual that transitions you from one role to the other can be really helpful to be able to effectively manage both those boundaries. Now, let's say you work from home. You don't have a commute. Then what do you do? And this is probably where, this is definitely where some individuals have reported that burnout doesn't necessarily decrease by working at home, because those lines are blurred all the time between home and work. And so the necessity for rituals becomes even greater. So I'll just give you an example of what this might look like. I taught an executive years ago who said, when I started working from home, I had to simulate a ritual. I had to simulate my commute. So instead of driving home and listening to the music that I usually listen to that gives my brain the signal that I'm switching roles, I'm gonna go on a walk. I'm gonna put on that exact same music. I'm gonna go on a walk for as long as my commute was, because that is my role transition. And I thought that was just kind of a brilliant idea for simulating the commute, even if you're working at home.